In the ancient gloom before the rising of the first stars, there was a disquiet in the deep places of the world where the memory of Melkor lingered like a dormant curse upon Arda, and his spirit, now known as Morgoth, churned in the void beyond all light and hope. He had been cast into that emptiness by the might of the Vala ages past, yet in darkness beyond the edge of day and night, the fallen Vala brooded with hatred unabated, weaving his malice into silent motions that rippled through unseen plains. A faint whisper drifted across the cosmic abyss, seeking an ear that had long been deaf to pleas of mercy or sorrow, yet ever open to sly counsel promising dominion. That ear, of course, belonged to Sauron, the once great lieutenant of Morgoth, who had claimed dominion over Middle-earth in a bid to finish what his master had begun. For centuries he had toiled, forging rings of power, subjugating kingdoms, and nearly toppling the free peoples, only to be thwarted by the resilience of men, elves, and hobbits. But while Sauron's spirit was slow to wane, even after the One Ring's destruction, a hidden dread gnawed at him, for he sensed that in some far-flung twilight corner of existence, his master stirred. He felt it in the prickling of shadows across the plains of Morgoth, in the trembling echoes that rolled through the cold stone of his strongholds, as though the very foundations of his tyranny were being subtly refashioned by a distant hand. There, in the gloom of his secret redoubt, he recalled the countless lessons in cruelty Morgoth had imparted. How to twist the hearts of men, to break the spirits of elves, and to war upon the Vala with cunning and flame. Yet Sauron believed himself the rightful inheritor of his master's throne, bound not by reverence but by his own ambition. He remembered too well how Morgoth had fallen. The Vala had judged him, and in that moment of dire sentence, they had locked him away into the void, never to return to Ea, or so they believed. But the void was endless, and the will of Morgoth unyielding. He was wounded, diminished in power, yet his hatred and capacity for evil were inexhaustible, echoing through the labyrinthine shadows beyond creation. Now, in that place, Morgoth had contrived a method that transcended all known illusions of time and space, a subtle thread of thought or corruption that could snake back into the fabric of Arda, seeking one mind alone that could recognize and wield its potency. That mind belonged to Sauron, and though the burdens of defeat weighed heavily upon him, he listened with renewed vigor, for the promise of a new design had reached him, and so it began, that Morgoth from the void began to whisper into the troubled dreams of the Dark Lord once more, sowing anew the seeds of a cataclysm that might overshadow all that had come before. Their communication at first was only the barest of impressions. Flickers of half-formed visions in Sauron's mind, moments when he felt an ancient presence regarding him from beyond the realm of the living. He doubted at first, thinking some cunning of the Vala had found a way to torment him with illusions of his old master, or perhaps the ragged remnants of his own pride conjured comforting delusions. But as the nights pressed on, Sauron's doubts withered, for the voice in his mind carried that same dread authority that once had commanded him to craft weapons of tyranny and subtle webs of power too distinct. Too terrible was the presence to be the fruit of his own imagination. At times, Sauron awakened with a start, drenched in cold sweat, not from fear but from a trembling sense of reverence mingled with ambition. If this was truly Morgoth, then all he had once planned could be reignited with greater might. No longer would Sauron be a solitary commander of scattered orcs and monstrous beasts. Lurking in the shadows under Morgoth's guidance, he might discover anew the fundamental secrets of Ea, the hidden knowledge that lay beyond the forging of mere rings, beyond the enchantments of twisted dwarven minds or corrupted elven forges. Yet the connection was fragile, as though some barrier still stood between them, a mighty wall of fate erected by the Vala themselves to keep Morgoth's will out of the world. Sauron, with all his cunning and skill, realized that if he were to open that door fully, it would require acts more sacrilegious and potent than any he had ever attempted. This thrilled him. And in the lonely halls of his reconstituted fortress, far away from the prying eyes of the free peoples, Sauron began new experiments in sorcery. The echo of Morgoth's malice guided him, teaching him half-finished formulas that teased the boundaries of mortal comprehension, urging him to unravel the wards that guarded Arda's fabric over time. That whisper in the void crystallized into words, shaping itself into a form that Sauron could understand, if only in the darkest recesses of his thought. All the while, the cosmos itself seemed to tremble with anticipation, as though the edges of reality sensed the return of a force thought banished forever. The process was excruciating, for Morgoth's direct influence on the mortal plane had been severed by the Vala's final decree. Every new word that reached Sauron's ears came like a shard of ice hammered against the shell of the world, requiring a sacrifice, a conduit of terror or grief strong enough to pierce that boundary. To facilitate this, Sauron ordered the capture of many living souls, elves, men, and even dwarves, whose fear or despair might serve as kindling for the sacrificial rites he performed, within black-walled chambers lit by baleful green flames. He recited incantations older than the stars, gleaned from the tatters of Morgoth's secret lore that he had hoarded long ago. Through these rites, each cry of terror, each final gasp of despair, was diverted into the chasm separating the void from Arda's living tapestry, rending it ever so slightly more gruesome though these deeds were. Sauron felt no remorse, for he viewed them as necessary steps in reclaiming the dominion that was rightfully his. Dominion over life and death, over darkness and light. At times he marveled at how closely these incantations mirrored the forging of the rings of power, for each act required the bending of will, the shaping of matter, and the twisting of hidden cosmic laws, but the forging of the One Ring had been child's play in comparison to what he now attempted here. He was dealing with the raw essence of being itself, prying open a cosmic prison that the mightiest of the Vala had sealed. At each success, the whisper from beyond grew clearer, more commanding, and Sauron would bow his head in a rare show of humility, for he knew that Morgoth was the true architect of these blasphemies. In those dread moments, he recalled the countless battles fought under Morgoth's banner, the broken mountains, the devoured light of the two trees, and the countless betrayals woven into the histories of elves and men. He remembered how Morgoth's vision was not merely to subjugate, but to fundamentally remake the world in his own image, a discord in the grand music of the Aenir that would twist every living note into a dirge of subservience and suffering. Now, that vision trembled on the brink of resurrection, waiting only for Sauron to complete the gateway that would unite the void with Arda over time. The orcs that gathered in Sauron's hidden domain sensed the change in their master's demeanor, for his eyes burned with a new intensity, reflecting a will that surpassed his own petty designs of conquest. Ever eager to serve, these creatures renewed their devotions, building altars of black stone, forging new blades under skies veiled by dark sorcery, and chanting hymns to Morgoth's name. Though they knew not how close their ancient master truly was in the lands beyond, scattered rumors flitted among the free peoples. Tales of vanishings, of villages razed by unknown marauders, of an evil presence stirring once more in the east. But war-weary men and elves were slow to rouse themselves. They believed the ring of tyranny had been shattered with the One Ring, and that Sauron's power was no more than a fading echo. Only a few guardians and wandering rangers took notice of the subtle shift in the wind, the uneasy hush that settled over the wild places, or the sudden quiver in the hearts of beasts. Sauron, meanwhile, reveled in their complacency. He no longer required large armies to storm the gates of men, for his ambition had grown beyond mere armies. He sought to open the cosmic door for Morgoth's return, which would herald a doom beyond imagining, and so he persevered in his rites, communing nightly with that voice in the void. Each sacrifice, each drop of blood spilt, each cry of agony, was a stepping stone in the labyrinth leading to a door that should never be opened. For though the soul of Arda was resilient, it had been scarred before, and old wounds can be reopened with malignant precision. All the while, Sauron felt a measure of satisfaction, for he believed he was still steering the course, that Morgoth's knowledge was a means to his own ends. He never quite realized how deeply his soul was being reshaped by that contact, how the darkness beyond the void might use him as a vessel for something more terrible than himself. Morgoth's voice, once ephemeral, took on a terrible clarity in Sauron's dreams, speaking words that etched themselves into his waking mind like runes of fire. The fallen Vala revealed lost secrets of creation, gleaned from his time among the Aenir before the music even began. These secrets spoke of forging living nightmares from the clay of fear, of altering the essence of beasts and bending them into shapes more suited to cruelty and war. But Morgoth also hinted at deeper truths, the possibility of corrupting the very song of the Aenir that sustained the world, weaving a cacophony that would erode the foundations of Valinor and Middle-earth alike. Though Sauron had once been a Maya of all, he now trembled at the immensity of what Morgoth proposed, for it was an unraveling of the world's core laws, a rewriting of the cosmic symphony. Yet he pressed on, seduced by the grandeur of such an undertaking. He envisioned a second discord, mightier than that which Morgoth had once unleashed, a discord that would claim all of EA for darkness, with Sauron as the second in command. To achieve this, Morgoth's voice counseled him to construct a grand instrument of doom, a device that would harness the discord and magnify it, allowing Morgoth's influence to seep through the cracks in reality on a scale never before witnessed. While the Rings of Power had been designed to dominate the wills of others, this new artifact would be forged to dominate the very essence of creation. Sauron named it the Abyssal Core, a vessel of black stone and smelted star metal, to be infused with the tears and blood of countless sacrificial victims. In the forging of this core, Sauron spared no cruelty, capturing wraiths of men who wandered near old battlefields, summoning spirits of malice from the ancient deeps beneath the misty mountains, binding them into the materials with incantations older than the sun. Yet even as he poured his will into the forging, he could sense Morgoth's delight from across the void. Morgoth's guidance was precise, revealing hidden runes that Sauron had never encountered, and instructing him on the precise alignment of certain celestial bodies under which the forging must be done. So it was that, under a moonless sky rent by unnatural storms, Sauron set the final seal upon the Abyssal Core, believing that soon it would serve as the ultimate key to the lock of the void. Yet forging the core was only the first step, for its power lay dormant until awakened by a ritual requiring the presence of living vessels strong in spirit, those who carried within them the unquenchable fires of courage or profound wisdom. Thus, Sauron devised a plan to ensnare the mighty from among his enemies, or to sow fear across Middle-earth so dire that the bravest would be drawn forth. He turned his attention to the scattered elves who still lived in pockets of forest sanctuaries, to the Dunedain rangers who patrolled the northern wilds, and even to the remnants of dwarven communities in the Iron Hills. He knew that each held individuals of remarkable inner strength, the kind of which he needed to feed the core's awakening. So it came to pass that his orcs, bolstered by hideous beasts newly bred for stealth and swiftness, began to strike in the dead of night, capturing those of notable valor or lineage. They did not kill them outright but bore them away in iron cages to hidden pits, where Sauron awaited with his vile apparatus, reciting arcane formulas gleaned from Morgoth's unholy whisper. The anguish of these captives was refined into raw spiritual energy, the very substance that the Abyssal Core required. Still, the captives' defiance shone. Some would sing songs of the elder days, invoking memories of the Vala's triumph, or recount the bravery of ancient heroes who had once bested Morgoth's legions. Their hope was a thin shield against the creeping dread that pervaded these prisons, yet it glowed with a stubborn brightness unbeknownst to these prisoners. Their hope was precisely the fuel Sauron sought. He took perverse delight in watching them cling to their last threads of courage, for the more they resisted, the brighter their spirits burned, thus the greater the power that could be siphoned into the core night after night. The ritual progressed, each captive's final scream or unbroken vow echoing through the labyrinth of black stone. And with each echo, Sauron felt the presence of Morgoth grow stronger, looming at the periphery of the world's conscious fabric, testing the boundaries that had long sealed him away. At length, the hour arrived when the Abyssal Core stood on the threshold of activation, its surface pulsing with a cold, unearthly glow. Sauron could feel the living malice within it, an extension of Morgoth's will coalescing into tangible power. He prepared a final rite, one that would culminate in a cataclysmic surge of energy potent enough to tear a hole in the barrier between the void and Arda. Yet as Sauron and his thralls orchestrated the unholy ceremony, a new current of thought rippled through him. Something akin to doubt, but swiftly stifled by ambition. For in the corner of his mind, he feared that once Morgoth returned, the Dark Lord himself might be relegated to a mere lieutenant again, overshadowed by the ancient might he had once served. Pride and devotion warred in his soul, but his thirst for power drowned out lingering concerns, urging him forward in this moment of cosmic significance. The skies above Middle-earth darkened, not through the ordinary passage of clouds, but through some deeper blotting of starlight, as if the heavens themselves recoiled from what was about to be unleashed. The orcs chanted in guttural unison, drums echoed across the black plains, and a wind bearing the stench of decay swept over the fortress. Then came the sign. An alignment of pale stars, recognized by Sauron as the final piece of Morgoth's formula. As their faint luminescence pierced through the swirling darkness, the Abyssal Core awakened fully, flaring with a bleak radiance that seemed to devour hope rather than illuminate. A tremor shook the land, toppling lesser towers, sending beasts into frenzy, and quenching fires in distant hamlets. In that convulsing moment, Sauron raised his voice in a vile chant, bridging his own will to Morgoth's across the gulf of creation. Suddenly, the world held its breath. The air itself froze, and all living creatures felt a momentary suffocation, as if an unseen hand clutched their hearts. Then it passed, and from the core there came a vortex of black flame, twisting upward into the firmament, forming a gateway that flickered with possibilities of unstoppable ruin. Through that swirling aperture, Sauron caught a glimpse of the void. Endless shadow, pregnant with malevolent shapes that had not tasted the winds of Arda since the dawn of time. He sensed Morgoth's presence pressing against the threshold, a vast and formless terror that sought to pour itself into the vessel of the world at the same time. A cosmic recoil occurred, as the fabric of reality tried to heal, sealing off the wound that threatened to let in a second discord. Lightning tore across the sky, not white or blue, but a sickly green, and thunder rumbled like the deep laughter of an ancient being awakened from slumber. In that clash, the abyssal core began to crack under the strain, for even Morgoth's cunning had not fully accounted for the immediate pushback of Arda's inner harmony. Bolstered by the memory of Eru Iluvatar's design, Sauron realized the risk. If the core failed too soon, the gateway would close, cutting off Morgoth's intrusion prematurely and possibly unleashing a destructive backlash that could annihilate the fortress. Perhaps even him. Desperation seized him, and he poured his essence into stabilizing the ritual, calling upon every shred of knowledge gleaned from Morgoth, every vestige of his own once great power. The spirits bound within the core shrieked, their cries echoing across realms seen and unseen. Then, all at once, the gateway pulsed with renewed vigor, stabilizing, though it wavered like a candle in a storm. To keep it open, Sauron realized he might have to sacrifice more than just captives or beasts. The energy demand was too great. For a split second, he considered offering up his own essence, merging his spirit with the gateway, ensuring Morgoth's full return at the cost of his individuality. Yet as that fleeting thought crossed his mind, the cunning part of him, once the greatest Maya under all, recoiled, whispering that there must be another way, a lesser sacrifice that would suffice. So he reached out with his will, seizing upon the captive souls gathered in the fortress depths, and he channeled their accumulated essence, their last sparks of defiance and hope, into the abyssal core. A wave of anguish radiated outward, stifling all light, all warmth, and the gate flared wide for a moment, revealing a shape within the void vaster, darker than any mortal mind could fathom. Above the fortress, as if responding to the cosmic upheaval, the wind carried a faint but poignant echo. The lament of the Eldar, or perhaps the final residue of the music of the Aenir that refused to yield entirely to darkness. This resonance clashed with Morgoth's rising presence, and where they met, a searing light exploded in the heavens, casting twisted shadows over the land. For an instant, it seemed as though Morgoth himself would stride back into the realm of Arda, wreathed in black flame. Unstoppable, Sauron's heart pounded with anticipation and dread, for he stood at the pivot of creation, simultaneously opening and defending the door for his ancient master. Yet fate is seldom a straight path, and the living tapestry of Arda began to stitch itself back together, resisting the invasive force. Morgoth's presence, though terrifyingly close, struggled to coalesce into a physical form. The swirling energies crackled, black lightning dancing around the swirling vortex of the core. Those orcs who looked upon that dread silhouette cowered, some even fleeing, for the aura of Morgoth was too immense to endure, and madness took them in that moment. The fortress quaked, fissures attuned to devour the energies it had so painstakingly collected. Sauron fought to hold them closed, chanting with what remained of his voice, while Morgoth's voice roared through his mind, demanding more power, more sacrifice. The conflict grew so intense that Sauron feared he might be torn asunder if the energies he had gathered burst uncontrollably. But in that final moment before disaster, a precarious balance was struck. Morgoth's presence flickered on the brink, neither fully banished nor fully incarnate, and Sauron sensed that the time was not yet ripe for his master's complete return. Weary but resolute, Sauron poured the last dregs of captive souls into the core, which stabilized just enough to maintain a tenuous link, a partial anchoring of Morgoth's essence within the fortress. And so it came to pass that Morgoth hovered between worlds, a looming power not yet embodied, but present enough to cast his shadow across Middle-earth's destiny. His communication with Sauron was no longer a faint whisper. It was a constant presence, a commanding force that suffused the fortress with an oppressive gloom. Though unable to stride forth in full form, Morgoth's knowledge began to flow into Sauron in a steady torrent, filling gaps in the Dark Lord's understanding of cosmic laws and deeper corruptions. With each revelation, Sauron felt both exhilarated and uneasy, for he realized how narrow the line was between harnessing such power and being consumed by it. In the days that followed, storms raged across the plains of Morgoth, and the very air seemed charged with uneasy foreboding. Morgoth's partial presence reshaped the land around the fortress. New pits opened spontaneously, exhaling foul vapors, and monstrous creatures crawled forth from hidden cracks, drawn to the aura of their ancient master. All the while, the free peoples of Middle-earth remained largely ignorant of this dire shift. Though a handful of elven lords and wise men sensed a growing disturbance, even the Vala, far removed in Valinor, felt a subtle tremor in the harmony of the world, hinting at a new threat, but they did not yet know how close Morgoth had come to. Returning, Sauron stood at the pinnacle of his fortress, the abyssal core still pulsing in the great hall below, and he gazed at the roiling sky with eyes that gleamed red. He felt at once more powerful and more vulnerable than ever. He had opened a door to the void that should have remained sealed, and though Morgoth was only partly through it, the course of events had been irrevocably changed in the distance. Thunder growled like some primordial beast, and Sauron knew that war and terror would soon spread across the lands as he furthered Morgoth's design. Yet in some hidden chamber of his mind, the question echoed. Would he remain merely the herald of Morgoth's will, or was there still a path for him to reshape destiny in his own image? But that question would remain unanswered for now, as the specter of Morgoth infused him with new tasks and new knowledge that promised to shatter the world anew. Thus did the veil of night descend upon Middle-earth, darker than it had been in many an age, bearing the promise of an even greater darkness to come. In the black hours that followed, Sauron's scribes etched new runes into tablets of basalt, carefully recording the revelations handed down by Morgoth. These were truths best left forgotten. Methods of enslaving higher spirits, formulas for unraveling the illusions of the living world, and deeper ways to enslave the essence of men and elves. Sauron oversaw these inscriptions with grim satisfaction, for he knew the time would come to unleash them day by day. His fortress buzzed with activity. New forges were lit, forging weapons with metal that seemed to drink the light around it. Armies of orcs swelled in number as they rallied to the new call, sensing the rebirth of a power greater than they had ever served before. Yet for all his outward confidence, a part of Sauron trembled, for the price of Morgoth's knowledge was not yet fully paid, and the link between them was now so strong that he could feel Morgoth's constant hunger for suffering, for domination, for final victory over all that was once fair or free. The future lay open like a wound, waiting to be filled by either the healing forces of the world or the infection of darkest tyranny. And as the night wore on, the shape of Morgoth hovered just beyond the threshold, waiting, watching, whispering with each breath of wind that rattled the iron gates. So did this chapter of doom remain incomplete. For the gate was not yet fully open, nor was it slammed shut. The path to Morgoth's full resurgence lay in a labyrinth of further sacrifices and cunning manipulations, and Sauron, at the center of it all, stood poised to either become the world's next enslaver or be devoured by the legacy of his own master's unending hate. Arda's fate stood on a razor's edge, and this moment would echo far into the future, where new legends or tragedies might yet be written.